So for this project, you're gonna use your Gemini die cutting machine and the backpack dies. You've got your bag panel die. This one's your bag flap. This is the bag base. And this is for the bag straps and the bag handle. All of these are gonna be cut with the fabric on the fold. And for many of them, you'll need to cut out your main fabric, a liner fabric, and a stabilizer. So for this project, I'm using this nice plaid, just some plain black quilting cotton for my lining. I'm gonna use the Threaders faux leather for my straps and my handle, and I'm gonna need a good sturdy stabilizer so that this backpack doesn't just collapse in on itself. I want it to maintain that bucket shape. I also need 4 D-rings. I'm using these brass ones from Threaders, and of course, a good pair of fabric scissors and your basic sewing supplies and a sewing machine. So I'm starting with my main fabric, and I've got it folded so that the die fits on here, but this is the main bag panel, and I need 2 of these. So to make quick work of it, I'm gonna fold this in half again so that I've got 2 folds on the outside here. And the reason why I'm doing this is to save time. Because these dies are bigger, deeper, thicker than regular paper crafting dies, they can go through multiple layers of material. So 4 layers is no problem for this big bag die. So that'll just save me all that extra cutting. So I can subcut this. So the sandwich configuration is your base plate, your fabric, then your die going right over the fold. You can see you want to place your die so that it's just over the edge of your material. That way the folds are maintained. And if you're cutting something very, very thick, you may want to use your metal shim underneath your die and fabric. Test it out first though. You may not need it at all. Then it's your plastic shim and your top plate. And then we can run it through the Gemini. And what's great about using the dies is that you know all of your pieces are gonna be exactly the same shape. And there we go. Okay, you can set those aside. You wanna do the exact same thing with the liner and the stabilizer. Okay, so I've got 2 outer bag panels, 2 liners, and 2 stabilizers. And everything is exactly the same size. That's what's great about using the dies. Okay, let's do the same thing with the flaps. So I'm just laying out my fabric again, folding it over, and I'm just gonna subcut just enough so I'm not wasting anything. Line up my die just over the fold, plastic shim, top plate. Okay, there's the flap. Gonna do the same with the liner and the stabilizer. We'll set those 3 aside. Now I wanna cut the bag base, and that's using this sort of half moon die. Again, I'm gonna take my fabric, fold it over, and run it through the machine. And that's the bag base with the liner and the stabilizer. So the last die in the set is this rectangular one, and this is gonna be used for the bag straps and the bag handle. And we've got a little bit of folding to do, so pay attention here. So for the handle, I'm gonna use this black faux leather from Threaders, and I wanna make sure it measures at least 8 inches. And it needs to be a little bit wider than the die. So I'm just gonna subcut here. Just roughly cut what you need. The die will take care of the real measuring and the accuracy. And then I'm gonna lay down my bottom plate, my metal, my plastic shim, and my die with the cutting edge up. And the handle needs to be at least 8 inches. So I'm gonna measure about 8 inches, just a little over, and rough cut. And now I know I can I'll lay the edge of the fabric over top the cutting edge, and you can see the die has this little notch right here. That notch indicates where you should fold the fabric. So if you're starting at the cutting edge with the end of your fabric, as soon as you get to that edge, you wanna fold. Put my top plate on and run it through the machine. And now I've got my perfect handle. So I need to do that one more time because we need 2 handle pieces. 2 that measure 8 inches and 2 that measure at least 23 inches. But depending on how loose or how fitted you want your backpack to be, you can adjust that length. But we're suggesting 8 and 23 as a pretty standard size. So I'm just roughly cutting enough for 2 23-inch straps and 2 8-inch straps. Now just a tip, your faux leather is gonna come folded, but because it's faux, it's got a nice soft material on the back. You can go ahead and iron this on low heat, so any of those folds will come right out. Just be sure you're ironing on the cloth side. A little steam flattens this right out. There, a nice iron piece is much easier to cut. All right, so I'm just gonna make sure that it's wide enough on each side. So to cut the straps, I'm gonna put the base plate, my plastic shim, the die face up, and my roughly cut strap, again, about 23 inches. So I'm laying it down over that edge, and then as soon as I see that notch, I'm gonna fold again, and then not let it go past. Now, because I've got so many layers of faux leather here, I may need to bring in my metal shim. just for the extra pressure. And now I've got one big, long strap. Okay, I just need to do that one more time. We need 2 of those. Okay, so you should have your bag panel made out of your stabilizer, your liner, and your outer fabric. Your bag flap with the liner, the stabilizer, and the outer fabric. And same with the base. You've got your 2 handles. You've also got your 2 8-inch straps, and then your 2 longer 23-inch straps. Now we're ready to sew. Now I'm gonna separate out the pieces a little bit. The straps in all the leather are going over here. I'm gonna keep the stabilizer and the outer fabric all together because I need to put that stabilizer on my outer fabric. And I'm gonna treat my lining fabric all as one also. All except for the front flap. We're gonna treat the front flap a little bit differently. We don't want there to be any seam that shows. So let's start here. I'm first going to, on all of my outer pieces, adhere my stabilizer. So I'm using an iron-on stabilizer here. So this is gonna be the time to iron that on, or maybe you're using a spray or a sew-in. Whatever you're using, read the instructions and find out how to adhere it to your outer fabric. Now's the time to do it. So I'm gonna do that to all my outer pieces. So with a hot, dry iron, I am just ironing on my stabilizer, and that's gonna keep my outer fabric nice and stiff. Otherwise, I would have a very floppy backpack. Okay, the stabilizer is on all of my exterior pieces. Now I'm gonna work on the front flap. Because we don't want there to be any seam showing, we've gotta treat this like it's one piece. So I'm gonna sew all around the front. I'm leaving a fairly large opening because this is so stiff, so that I can have an easier time getting it out. And then I'll just top stitch down that opening. So I like to use clips for making bags. Because this stabilizer is so stiff, I found that it just bends my pins. So the clips work great. Okay, I'm just gonna stitch all around here. I'm just attaching my 1/4-inch foot here to have a nice even seam around the entire thing. When I get to the corner, I'm gonna lift up my presser foot, pivot, and put the presser foot back down and carry on. Okay, I've got it all sewn on, and because I use the dies, everything fits so perfectly together. Okay, now I'm just gonna turn it right side out. Just use your fingers to press out those seams so I can get an even crisper seam on the corners. Now I just wanna fold down that seam underneath and the seam here. And I'm gonna touch this with the hot iron. This stabilizer actually has adhesive on both sides, so I'll be able to iron it down to both sides of my flap. This is looking nice and crisp. Okay, so now I'm gonna top stitch just one line of stitching all around the edge, just to prevent that from ever rolling over or under. It's gonna make it look nice and professional. Look how nice and crisp this all looks. It's amazing what you can make yourself. Okay, I'm gonna set this aside and start assembling the rest of the backpack. So now I'm gonna assemble the liner and the outer fabric in exactly the same way, but separately. So I'm gonna start with the outer backpack. The first thing I'm gonna do is put right sides together. And I'm gonna sew a 1/4-inch seam down both of these sides. What's nice is when you use the dies, you know everything's matching up. So I'm just sewing along the right and left side. I'm leaving the top and bottom open. Again with a 1/4-inch seam. And the other side. So now I'm gonna open the bag up, and you can see we've got this oval shape, perfect for the bottom. The first thing we're gonna do is find the center, and find the center of our bag base. I'm finger pressing it, but it's a dark pattern, so I'm just gonna mark it with some chalk. Because knowing where that center is on both ends, so I've got a center point here and a center point here, I also want center points at this end. So I'll go right sides together and line up those two centers and find my center over here and finger press, and over here and finger press. And I'm gonna mark it with some chalk. Now I know where my seams should line up. So start with the long end, with one end over here, and with right sides together, I'm gonna line up that chalk mark, and I'm gonna open up this seam like that so it's not quite as bulky, and I'm gonna clip it. I told you these clips were handy. And then on the other side, I'm gonna line up that seam and open it up, open up this seam, and clip it. And then my center here with my center on this side, and same with this side. And then you can just fill in with a few more clips. Okay, now that I've got my bottom all clipped to the body of my bag, I'm gonna sew it around with a 1/4-inch seam. Take your time here. I'm sewing very slowly. Don't be afraid to bend and twist and smush your bag a little bit. It's not gonna hurt it. Okay, this is looking good. And before we attach our bag flap liner to our actual bag, we want to fasten the hardware on there while we can still access it and not have it show through on the right side of our fabric. So I'm just gonna put a little chalk mark. Then I'm gonna take my seam ripper and just put a slight rip in the fabric, just enough for the teeth to get through, and then bend over those teeth on the inside of the liner. Sometimes it helps to bend them down with something hard. Okay, that's fastened nice and tight. Put aside the other little piece because that part we're gonna attach after I've sewn on the top flap. That way I know it's gonna measure up perfectly. The other thing I wanna do before I construct the bag too much is assemble the handle. So we've got 2 bag handle pieces, and I'm just gonna put them right sides together and sew a 1/4 inch seam down each side. So I'm just turning this handle right side out, and now I've got this tube. I'm gonna flatten it with the hot iron, but because I'm using the faux leather, I'm just gonna put a piece of fabric over top of it and press it down. And now I'm just gonna top stitch along either side. Now it's nice and flat with that top stitching. Looks good. And on the top part of my bag, I'm just gonna center this. I'm gonna fold over the ends and center it on the top flap of my bag. Now remember, this is gonna be a pressure point in the bag, so you're gonna wanna reinforce these stitches. I'm just gonna mark with chalk exactly where I want it to end, and take your time here with these stitches because they're going to show. When I get to the end, I'm gonna pivot, and I'm gonna do like a cross X in the middle of that box. Okay, now you can see that X has reinforced that handle on this side so it's nice and strong. I'm just gonna snip the threads and do the other side. Okay, the handle's on there nice and tight. All right, I'm gonna set this aside and work on the liner. I'm just gonna sew 2 straight lines down either side, about a 1/4 inch seam. And the other side. Okay, now on the bottom of the bag, which is the smaller end, I'm going to put right sides together and sew the circular bottom onto the bag. And just like I did with the outside, I'm gonna find my centers and just mark it with a little bit of chalk. And I'm gonna find my center on the bottom of my bag too. And then I'm gonna line up these points. This is just gonna keep everything nice and centered. And then you can pin or clip, line it up on the other side, and then you know the seam is the center on the side, line it up. Okay. Now I am gonna be sure to leave about a 3 or 4 inch opening in the bottom of the liner so that I can turn it right side out once the liner has been attached to the outer bag. Okay, so I've left a bit of an opening so I can turn it right side out. But before I get to putting the liner in the bag, I wanna make sure everything's gonna line up for the hardware. So when the bag closes, it's gonna go like this. Okay, remember we set aside the little bottom part of the clasp fastener? This is where it's gonna go on to the bag. I'm gonna line up the flap where I think it's gonna fall on the bag, lift it up, and I'm just gonna mark a little dot with chalk where the other side of the clasp fastener should go. And with my seam ripper, I'm just gonna poke a little hole right through and insert it through the front. This way we don't see any of the hardware on the liner. Poke it through, and then I'm just gonna bend down those teeth, use something hard to do it. And now, the clasp is on the inside of the bag. And when we put the liner in, we won't see any of that ugly hardware. Okay, my liner is ready, but I'm gonna take a few minutes to prepare my straps. So I've got my long strips, the bottom and the top of the straps. And I'm just gonna go ahead and fold them over and do a nice long stitch all the way down. And I'm gonna do the same with the other side and the bottoms of the straps. Then we're gonna adhere it to the bag. And it's important to get this done before you put the liner in the bag so you can sew it right to it. So I'm gonna go ahead and attach the back tabs to the back of the backpack. And then I'm gonna hook in some of the rectangular rings from threaders. And now I could have made life much easier on myself if I would have attached these to the outside of the bag prior to sewing the bag together. I was just too eager. That's okay, I can do it now. Okay, so the backpack straps are fastened on. And if you wanted to make them a little longer, you could hide them in the seam of the bottom of the bag too. That's what I'm gonna do with the top strap. Okay, so now we want to attach our liner, our top back flap, and our straps all to the outer bucket of the bag. So we're turning the bag inside out. There's gonna be a lot going on the inside of this bag. So the first thing I wanna do is clip that in place. Same with the other one, line it up. And now over top of that, we're gonna take our bag flap, right sides together, clip that in place. Remember, all of this is gonna get flipped out in that hole we left in the lining. And I'm gonna take the liner also, right side, and put it in the bucket, right sides together. I'm just gonna make sure I line up the seams. Then I'm just gonna sew all the way around the perimeter with about a 1/4 inch seam. Take it slow when you're going over the straps and the front flap. It's a lot of material for your machine to go through. And if you weren't already, I'd suggest using some kind of heavy duty needle, like a leather or a denim needle. They're just a bit stronger. So now with that hole that we left, let's flip it. Just get in, push all that stiff outer bag out. Some nice crisp seams. It's sort of amazing how smooth and professional it suddenly looks when you turn it right side out. All of the hardware and the straps have all been hidden on the inside. Now, all I need to do is sew the hole that we turned it right side out in back up together. And for a nice finished look, I'm going to top stitch all the way around the top of the bag here. So I've just top stitched all around the bucket so it's laying nice and flat, and that's my backpack. So cute. And maybe you never thought you were the kind of sewer that would be able to construct a backpack, but you'll be able to do it many times over when you don't have to worry about the pattern and that you know the pieces will always fit perfectly every time, thanks to the backpack dies from Gemini.